Hey, welcome and welcome back, everybody, to Kettlebell Corner. I'm your host, Jeremiah Whalen, with my co-host, Roger Parks. And today we have a special guest, Iron Tamer Dave Whitley. He's a speaker, author, coach, and father, former kettlebell certification instructor. He literally wrote the book on the bent press called Taming the Bent Press. You can get that at superstrengthbooks.com. He's the author of the book Superhuman You. He's been in the kettlebell game for 20 plus years and the president of oldtimestrongmanuniversity.com and all around Van Halen fan. Dave, welcome. How you doing, brother?
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to do this.
We appreciate you coming on. Is there anything I missed you want to elaborate on real quick for the people listening, or are you ready to dive right in?
I'm ready to dive in. The only thing that's like really relevant to what I do at this point in my life is there was no mention of, and we didn't talk about this before we started recording either. For the past 7 or 8 years, I've been involved in practicing the Wim Hof method. And I'm a Wim Hof method instructor, cold exposure, breath work, all of that kind of stuff. So if that becomes relevant to our conversation, don't be surprised if we start talking about it. But if it's not relevant, then we don't have to talk about it either. So it's all good.
Excellent. I love that. That's interesting. I did the Wim Hof app for the 30-day breathing challenge, and it was very fascinating. I ended up holding my breath for like 4.5 some odd minutes or something like that on it. And it was pretty cool. That may indeed come up through as we go through. So you're a strong man. You know, we've seen it all. You jam a nail through a board, pop a balloon, bend Volkswagens, and do all kinds of things like that. Can you be a strong man if you only use kettlebells?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
There were a lot of guys in the old days, and when I say old days, I mean late 1800s, early 1900s, the golden age of performing strongmen, who the feats of strength that they did on stage were primarily lifting, not bending and breaking things. So there's like a whole bunch of different subcategories of feats of strength. Most notably is the mighty Arthur Saxon, who still to this day holds world records that were set in 1905 on the bent press and on the two hands anyhow. The bent press was 370 pounds on a barbell put overhead with one hand, and the two hands anyhow was 448 and a half pounds, which was a 336 pound barbell and 112 and a half pound kettlebell. First the barbell goes up, then you pick the kettlebell up off the floor and put that up. And so with two hands anyhow, it's anyhow you can get two weights overhead or weight overhead in two hands counts. But Herman Garner was another one who did a lot of lifting feats and did a lot of kettlebell related things. It was commonly referred to as kettle weights in any of the old literature that you read about him. But he was as far as I know, the closest to Saxon, and I don't remember the exact number, but it was close to 400 pounds that he put up. I want to say it was 440. It seems like he had 4 50-kilo kettlebells, and he lifted 2 of them in one hand and then grabbed a third one and hooked it over his thumb and then grabbed the fourth one and pressed it with the other hand. So, yeah, you can totally be a strong man using nothing but lifting feats. I do some lifting feats in my shows and stuff now, but more of what I do is the feats of strength, like you referenced, like bending steel, breaking chains, ripping decks of cards in half, that kind of stuff.
Right. When it comes to the kettlebell,
it all comes from the same root.
Yeah. When it comes to the bent press, if somebody's like getting into kettlebells or maybe they've been in a while, when should they start practicing that bent press, and like who is that good for to be doing?
When they should start is dependent on how they are learning. If they're just goofing around by themselves, they can play with it and try to figure it out from day one. If they have a lot of things going on physically that are limiting their movements, then we may need to work around that a little bit. But toward the end of my gym owner career, I would start people and anybody that was interested in learning the bent press, no matter how long they've been coming, I would start working with them on the movement itself. So it can help pretty much anybody. There's a ton of benefit to be had from the bent press. It is Sig Klein, who's another old-time strongman who did primarily lifting feats, wrote a book called How to Bent Press that right? Yeah, how to bench press. And he referred to the bench press as the king of lifts. And this is back in the early 1900s, before squat racks and powerlifting and all that kind of stuff. Now, in our modern time, the squat has taken over that moniker for most people as the king of lifts, either the squat or some people would say the barbell clean and jerk. And I am of the opinion that all three of those lifts could be argued to be top notch, depending on the person that's doing them. But the bench press will work your movement patterns and your strength in a way that nothing else does, as far as the completeness of the movement, because you're moving across all your joints, you're rotating the spine, which is something that happens almost never in barbell work, or conventional modern barbell work anyway. So strengthening that rotational ability in the spine is critical. The range of motion that the shoulder joint goes through from here to the bent over spot to the overhead there's no other lift that trains that range of motion under load that way, that accomplishes what the bench press does. The Turkish get up is a close cousin to the bench press in the way that I categorize it and the way that I teach it. And it does a lot of miraculous stuff for shoulders as well. So the two of them working together are fantastic.
So if you're picking a couple kettlebell skills that you're going to focus on with your training, or you'd recommend to people to get strong, would those be the two you'd start with?
That's two different questions. One is what am I doing in my training, and the other one is what would I recommend people to get strong. With me personally, I cycle through various things that I'm interested in. I honestly haven't done much bench pressing for a couple of years now. I have done a lot of one arm pressing, and I've evolved in my approach on that from the very strict hardstyle one arm military press into an approach that I got from Bud Jeffries. And if you guys don't know Bud Jeffries, everyone who's interested in knowing about strength needs to know who Bud Jeffries is, because he is a monster, an absolute monster in terms of what he's able to do, and also in terms of his creativity and his ability to convey information. But anyway, he did a product a few years ago on the one arm press, and he broke the entire thing down kind of into this strictness continuum that goes from a strict one arm military press that we're all familiar with on one end, and then on the other end you have the jerk, which is about as far from a strict press in terms of how you're using your body as you can get. But then there's little branches that go off in there that smell and taste like the bench press in some places. And what he ultimately turned me on to with this approach is what he calls, and what I've adopted as a way of calling it too, is the natural press. So what you do is you learn how all of these different movements are done, and not just learn how to do them, but like actually do them and start to absorb some of the ability to do those things. You don't have to become world class at any of them to reap benefits from them, but to use the overused quote from Bruce Lee that is always incompletely done. There's the quote of absorb what is useful and discard what is useless, right? Well, that's taken out of the middle of a longer quote, which goes, research your own experience, absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and make the rest your own. So when we put that quote in its fullness, in its entirety that way, it takes on a different meaning, because just absorb what is useful and discard what is useless is very much like, this looks good, I like it. This looks bad, I think it sucks. And you've never done either one of them. If you research your own experience, you have to put the time in, you have to put the reps in to be able to understand it. And by the time you go through that entire process of learning what works and what doesn't work for you, then you wind up being in a place where you can make it uniquely your own. And that's the philosophy of the natural press, the way that I understand it, the way that I have taught it to people, is we have certain elements of a strict press that may be fantastic for me, but not so good for you. We have elements of the bent press that may be great for you and not so much for me. And then you have leg drive from the jerk and the push press and all these different little pieces that you can put together into your own recipe for what you would call a natural press. And the criteria there being that if it's naturally efficient or effective for your body type, your limb lengths, your leverages, your injury history, your training history or lack of training history, your mentality, your nutrition, your goals. All of those things have to be taken into consideration when we're choosing something to do. And if we say, okay, I'm going to do whatever naturally makes the most sense for my body, where I am right now and where I'm headed, then we wind up with a natural press. And that, of course, then lights the fire that cooks the meal that the trolls smell, and then they come to rip you apart because you're not doing it right. And never mind that their one arm press has been stuck at 24 kilos since Arnold Schwarzenegger made his last movie, So I love the internet trolls because
you're spot on with that. You're spot on with that. Yeah, it's everything's got to be so stuck in stone.
And I love it because I am a recovering member of the technique and form police. I used to be the guy that would criticize people for not doing things the way that I thought they should be. And my clients and my students taught me a better way to approach it, which is an individualized approach.
Can you talk a bit about that? How your concept of form has shifted?
Sure, absolutely. For the last few years that I was doing anything with Strong First, or even when I was with the RKC before the split happened, and I was involved in Strong First. So even in the RKC, this question kept going around in my mind after much contemplation on that very quote that we were speaking about earlier: is what is good form? And I would teach at certifications, and I would say, okay, you guys are a bunch of well-prepared, educated professionals who have the intention of taking this information and passing it on to other people as part of your livelihood. So you're going to get paid, you're going to get results for people, and you're going to help change their lives and help them become the people that they want to be. This is very important stuff that we're talking about. So, a group of anywhere from 30 to 150 people, right? Raise your hand if you believe that technique or exercise form, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably, is vitally important. Every hand in the room goes up without hesitation, right? And then the follow-up question to that is this: do you have a clear, concise, working definition of what good form or good technique is, regardless of the movement that we're describing? Universally, regardless of the movement, a definition of good form or good technique. And you'd be amazed at how many people all of a sudden had to text that they had to check out, or there was something over there. They had to take a note on the definition, right? Because no hands would go up. Or if they did go up, I would say, okay, what is your answer to that? And I'm curious if anybody on this little panel that we've got going here has an answer for that.
Well, in all fairness, I listened to your Secrets of Strength podcast, and I do like the direction you were going. I want you to finish so our people can hear where you're going.
Did you freeze up, or are you thinking?
Oh, I must have frozen up.
There you go, Dave. You got us all back now.
Yeah. I heard in all fairness and nothing after that.
Oh, I was going to say, I heard you on the Secret Strength podcast, and I heard this definition, which I thought was fantastic. I want you to keep going so our people can hear where you're going, and we can talk a little bit about that.
Okay. The answers that did come up would often be one word answers. Safe. It's sitting on the couch is safer than any exercise you're going to do. So that's not it. Effective. Efficient. And I'm like, I got your cogs turning in your mental machine there, but we're not quite getting there. And I put a lot of time and effort into mulling over this in my mind. And the definition that I ultimately arrived at, and there's several stages to the evolution of this definition, but the definition I ultimately arrived at is there's two parts to it. It is physiologically appropriate for the individual who's performing the movement. And two, it moves them in the direction of a goal. And I learned this. It was one of my clients that taught me this, because she had 2 shoulder surgeries on one side, 1 shoulder surgery on the other side, 1 leg longer than the other one, and a scoliosis thing happening. So just her standing there, her one shoulder was probably 2 inches higher than the other, and she kind of walked funny. And she was in her mid-50s, and we were working on these things. And I said, okay, what is it that you really want to do? And she's like, every time that I've ever tried to barbell press with 2 hands, I've always wound up getting hurt. I trust you. She says this to me. I trust you. Show me what you think I should do. And so I took a 20-pound unloaded bar, put it in the rack, and said, just go over there and pick that up out of the rack and press it overhead, however feels naturally good to you. And she did. And it was like this weird twisty thing. And one elbow went to the front and one out to the side. And it was like this little wedge and hitch under it kind of thing. And I'm watching her. She did 3 or 4 reps like that and racked the weight. And I said, how did it feel? She said, it felt great. And I said, that's where we're starting then. And all I did is allowed her to press within whatever her body deemed appropriate, and then added weight to it gradually over time, making it as comfortable as I possibly could for her to do that. Now, if you didn't know the backstory on that and you just saw this woman pressing with this horrible twisted up shape of a body that she was having, then the torches and the pitchforks would come out and people would be coming after me because I'm teaching this woman to do something that's inherently dangerous. 10 weeks later, she's doing sets of 5 with what was her? We started out I'm trying to remember the exact numbers. I don't remember the exact numbers. Whatever her 1 rep max was that first week, and we just kind of loosely worked up to it. So her true 1 rep max, shotgun in the face, you're going to die if you don't press this, might have been a little heavier than that. But her training max was whatever it was. And at the end, she was doing multiple sets. I mean, like 10 to 12 sets in a session of 3 to 5 reps with more weight than she could press one time at the beginning. And so I'm like, okay, that's an indicator. And so from there, I just kind of allowed that definition to whirl around in my mind until I arrived at physiologically appropriate for the individual who's doing the movement, and it moves them in the direction of a goal. Her body told us both how it needed to move in order to effectively do these presses. And so we took that, and then we just did a pretty standard progressive overload. We added weight, we subtracted rest periods, and over the course of about 12 weeks, she wound up, to quote her, swole as fuck.
Very good. The individualized approach is definitely one that we subscribe to, mainly because we all move different. We're all like Roger and I are surprisingly the exact same weight, but I'm like nearly 10 inches taller than him. And, he's nearly 10 inches wider than me. So it's like in like a good, beefy, strong guy way, but we move very differently. So our skill set is also very different in that regard. I can dig that definition. I can dig that for sure. I wanted to talk, you talk a lot
to bring that whole thing in for landing. When at the certifications, because I referenced that earlier, when I would unload that definition on everybody, the way that I knew that I was truly on to something that was just like a universal truth is people will go, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's so easy. You're like, oh, why didn't we think of that? It's so incredibly
obvious once someone has gone through the process of figuring it out. You're like, oh yeah, sure. It's like electricity. 200 years ago, if I told you I'm going to plug something into the wall and harness the power of light, you'd be like, no, we're going to burn you to stake. But now we take it for granted. So whenever I have had something that sort of falls into my lap as a result of my own thinking about stuff, and I tell it to other people, and multiple other people go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's true. Then when a truth is so self-evident like that, then I know that we're onto something that's universal, because there's really no way you can argue with that definition and be right.
It's true. You do a lot with like mindset coaching and like kind of like self-confidence and controlling over the outcomes these days, which I think is great. When you look back to some of your early kettlebell goals, what were some things that you could control that guide to those goals, or what were some areas where you strayed and had to then realize later, hey, this might have made a difference?
You cut out on me again right after the word outcomes.
Okay. Well, Good. I can rephrase it better. All right. All right. You got me. So what are some of your early kettlebell goals? And when it comes to the mindset to obtain those and reach them, what were some things that you used in your control? And what has changed over the years that you could go back and apply now to make a bigger difference?
Early kettlebell goals were things like pretty standard stuff, like being able to press a 48 kilo with each arm, being able to do 200 snatches with a 24. Did I say 48 kilo?
Yeah.
I might have said 24. Okay. Yeah. Because I can press a 24 kilo with either arm. Being able to do 200 snatches in 10 minutes with a 24 kilo, the old Secret Service Snatch Test thing, was something that I was very interested in the early days. The bent press and figuring all that stuff out was very consuming for me. I was very much a devotee of the idea of tension equals strength back then. And I am not so much anymore, because I realized that if tension equals strength, then you are your strongest when you can't move. And if you can't move, you can't apply force. If you can't apply force, then you're not exerting strength. Therefore, tension equals no strength. You know, there was some disconnects in that. And that was actually one of the things, that kind of thought process, that started putting me on the path of what I'm doing now as a strongman and as a personal development mind coach. Is if you have conflicting information, conflicting beliefs that are running in your operating system, which is your subconscious mind, then you will always be at odds with yourself, and you will always be searching for a way to rectify that or to disprove something. And so when I realized that I was not clearly defining what strength meant, but then I was saying that tension equals strength, there was a disconnect there. It was just like the technique thing. Technique's very important. What is technique? Right? What is strength? Strength is the ability to exert or withstand force. That's the definition I ultimately arrived at. And I've heard a lot of good definitions. Kenneth J. years ago said that he considers strength to be loaded mobility. And I thought that was a really good one, but it also takes out of the equation the ability to like counter rotation stuff, or the ability to remain still against an external force. So, you know, like if I'm pressing with one arm, I have to not fall that way as a part of the press, right? So I have to have that stability that's going on there. So taking the isometric factor into account was important for that. You know, if you load up a barbell to 40% more than your 1 rep max squat, and you put it on your shoulders, and you have a range of motion of 2 inches, and you stand up with it and you hold it for 2 or 3 minutes, you didn't actually do a rep. You didn't actually do much work in terms of movement, but you'll be tired, and it takes a lot of strength to do that. So there is a stillness element to it, but that's not all there is to it. There's also the mobility element to it. And I started looking at like some of the best gearboard sport guys and how relaxed they are. And I realized that there's like limit strength, and there's like aerobic running type endurance. But then there's this area in the middle that interested me the most at that time, which is a relatively heavy weight for a long period of time. That was very, very interesting to me. And so from starting to think in terms of that, I went on a swing quest, and ultimately worked up to, it's been 7 or 8 years ago, maybe more than that now, that I decided I wanted to do 1,000 swings with a 24 kilo in under an hour. And I accomplished that one. I wound up doing 200 snatches with 24 kilos in sub 8 minutes. And there's YouTube of that. So these were things that were driving me. I was very interested in the sustained strength aspect of it. And then after that period of time, I started moving into more of the limit strength feats kind of stuff, you know, grip strength and hand strength, that kind of stuff. And I may have gone completely off topic from whatever your question was there. I just, when it starts, when my mouth opens, I'll just let it do
it. Let it flow. Okay. No worries.
Oh, the mental approach. You were asking me about that earlier, right?
Yeah.
And I talk about this in the book. If I can plug this book that I wrote a few years ago, Superhuman You. If you want a copy of this book, and you're in the United States, the continental US, if you're anywhere else besides the continental US, it's on Amazon. If you're in the continental US and you want a copy of it, go to superhumanyobook.com and pay for shipping and handling, and I'll send you a free copy of it. So on Amazon, it's like $20 if you and plus shipping. If you want me to send you a free copy of it, I will. But shipping and handling winds up being right at $10. So
hey, worth it.
There you go.
I'll be your huckleberry.
One of the things that I talk about in that book, which was huge for me in understanding the role of the mind and everything, is once I got very serious about doing feats of strength, after I met Dennis Rogers, who was the founder and former president of Old Time Strongman University. He taught me feats of strength. He taught me how to use feats of strength to convey a message to a crowd, how to get booked for shows. I mean, there's a lot more to it than just bending steel and ripping cards from what we do in Old Time Strongman University, which he actually effectively retired in January of last year and appointed me president. So we haven't done a workshop since then because the plague came, but I'm looking at early next year locations for doing the workshop. And also there's a ton of useful information at oldtimestrongmanuniversity.com. I've got a free video that talks about force application and mindset. It talks about basic technique on bending nails and ripping cards. So all that stuff is on there. But the story that I'm referencing that's in the book is I started playing around with how the imagination works and how it affects physical results in 3D reality. And if anyone is familiar with steel bending, short steel bending, nail bending, that kind of thing, then you've probably heard of the Iron Mind red nail. And if you're not familiar with it, just know that it's this really tough piece of steel, 5/16 diameter, 7 inches long, cold rolled steel that a company called Iron Mind sells. And if you can bend one of these under the certain conditions that they outline, you get your name put on this list. And last time I checked, there was like maybe 150 people that had done it. I believe I was number 111, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But I decided this was something that I wanted to pursue. And I was at the same time, while I was doing the physical training that went along with that, because that is vital, I was also researching my own experience on how to use the mind to accomplish things. And I started looking into visualization, and I had been doing meditation things since I was in my late teens, involved in martial arts, and I've done various yogic practices and the stuff with Wim Hof and the breath work and all that. It all interrelates to me. So I started doing visualizations of what I thought this red nail thing was going to look like, and I created this scene in my mind where I was standing in front of a small group of people. I didn't know how many it was, but there was several people, but not a huge crowd. Sitting in chairs, and I was in my gym that I owned at the time, and I bent the nail, the red nail, and by the rules, you have to do it in under 1 minute. And in my mind, I bend the nail and I unwrap it and hold it up and look at it, and my referee says a time that was under 30 seconds. I just heard him say it was less than 30 seconds, and I'm like, yeah. And so celebrations ensued, right? And I would get into this meditative state, or when I was falling asleep at night, I would go through this scene from first person point of view. And 2 times during the course of training for this feat or this certification, while I was sitting there, laid back, eyes closed, droning meditative om type music or shamanic drums or something like that, playing like atmospheric music going, and I'm visualizing, and visualizing is an incomplete term. I'm more mentally rehearsing doing this thing, right? I can feel the nail in my hand. I can feel the pressure I'm exerting on it. I would practice this in my mind, and in my mind, I'm like, it bent like a stick of gum. That was my thing. It's bending like a stick of gum. There was just nothing to it, right? And 2 times in the midst of doing that, I started sneezing and knocked myself out of my meditative state. And the reason I was sneezing is chalk dust that was in the air. in my rehearsal scene. So I'm sniffing accidentally or incidentally imaginary chalk that makes me start sneezing. And I'm like, okay, I know that I've heard that the subconscious mind doesn't make a distinction between something that actually happens in 3D reality or something that is vividly imagined. And that was the thing that really made that point 100% non-arguable true for me. I'm sneezing over imaginary chalk dust. So I am in my mind, I am really there doing it. Fast forward to when the thing actually happened. We did an old-time strongman university workshop. Dennis Rogers, my mentor, was there. There was a group of guys there that were learning to do feats of strength. And the very first thing that we opened up with was my referee came, because the Iron Mind sends an impartial referee to do the thing. We came, we wrapped it up, and I opened with bending that red nail. And as I'm standing there, I'm looking out, and there's all these people sitting in chairs. I get in position. I bend the nail. It felt like a stick of gum. And this is on YouTube as well. I take it out, unwrap it, and I hold it up, and I look over at the referee, and he says 16 seconds. And I'm like, well, that was pretty well spot on. So the only difference between my imaginal rehearsed training with this feat and happened was that it went better in 3D. So that convinced me of the power of the mind. I started playing with the same sort of idea with clients, and have had actually several people that were would go to like level 2 strong first things, where they had to military press a particular weight, and they would get all messed up in the head about it and couldn't do it. And I had people who were physically incapable of doing it that would come to me I got to get this done. I've got my 6-month window or whatever it is to get the video sent back in, and for me as a master instructor to sign off on it. And at least 4 different times, I could name the people. I would take the person, I'd set them aside and say, listen, you know how to do this. You're strong enough to do this. Let's just do a little mental rehearsal. And I would like talk them into a relaxed state. And I'm like, okay, emotionally, what does it feel like after you've put the weight down doing the successful rep? And they would, whatever words they would say, that's what it meant to them, right? And without exception, these people would be able to go and lift a weight that they could not lift just a few minutes before.
So, yeah, that's very interesting. I actually recently completed a snatch test where the last near week and a half of my preparation was pretty much just that mental rehearsal. I would even set the timer, and then eventually I would just use the timer in my head for the 5 minutes. And when it all said and done, when it came down to doing it, I was very relaxed. It was probably the easiest snatch test I've ever done. And I can attest that it works. Now, I am probably one of those candidates for visualization of a 48 kilogram press, as currently is eluded me, but maybe by the time this airs, that will pass, as I will visualize from now until it happens. I think that's awesome.
Can I offer this to you as one of the most important things that I ever picked up on when I started doing feats of strength and started really getting strong compared to what I was when I first got involved with kettlebells? One of the biggest things for me was a switch flipped in my mind one day. I think I was talking to Dennis when it happened, but a switch flipped in my mind one day, and I realized 48 kilos isn't heavy. It's only 100 pounds. It's just not heavy. Comparatively speaking, I'm deadlifting, 525, something like that for reps, and doing all these other things, bending steel and whatever. And I'm like, 48 kilos isn't really heavy, but this cultural mystique built up around it. It's the beast and all that kind of stuff. Dude, it's just a piece of iron. It's just a piece of iron, right? And if you're a reasonably healthy, average-sized adult male, we can get you there.
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. You start telling yourself stuff's heavy, it's heavy. You tell yourself the bell feels light, then chances are the bell's going to feel light. I mean, there's definitely some elements of technique to still making that happen. What would you say?
And to that point, not only that it feels light, but that it's, it's just not heavy.
Yeah,
and when I could truly believe that, you clean it and it feels heavy. Okay, put it down, but it's not heavy. And if you tell yourself that long enough, then eventually you're like, you know what? It's not that heavy. It's not as heavy as a car, you know? And I would use that same kind of mentality when I would work with people who had, like I did some physique transformation that was geared specifically toward women in their mid 30s who had kids and that kind of stuff. That was the target of it. And they would come in, they would talk about this, 12 kilo or 16 kilo kettlebell being heavy. And I'm like, you have a 6-year-old, and I saw you carrying him the other day, and he weighs like 42 pounds or 65 pounds or something like that. You can pick your kid up. This kettlebell weighs less than them. And they're like, oh, hadn't thought about it that way. And yeah, that's the thing. You got it in your mind that this weight is heavy. What if it's not? What if you're just wrong about it being heavy?
I like that. What's your most impressive to you feat of strength with the kettlebell, and why?
You cut out again.
Freeze? Okay, that's all right. We'll work this out in the post. What's your most impressive to you?
You froze and I missed the question, so
that's right. I'll ask it again. Yeah. What's your most impressive to you feat of strength with the kettlebell, and why?
For myself,
sure.
Things that I've done that I think is most impressive. Bent press in a ponderously heavy, because I've done more weight than that on a barbell before, but because the kettlebell is this big and all that pressure is going on the back of the forearm, so it literally feels like someone's holding on to my because that pressure there, that was a tough one. I only ever did that once, and I didn't have video going, and so y'all just gonna have to believe me. As far as the sustained strength stuff, the 200 snatches in under 8 minutes with the 24 kilo, I feel good about that one. I was actually at one point interested in like calorie burn and what was going on with that. And I went to Vanderbilt University in Nashville and strapped into their metabolic testing gear with a 24 kilo kettlebell with the idea that I'm going to swing this kettlebell until I die if I have to, or until we get some good information. Heart rate peaked at around 180 and stayed there for a long time. And after I'm over with, and I lost count at 700 reps without putting it down. I was just, and I was having to breathe with that mask on and everything, So I don't know how many I actually did, but we came away with an average calorie burn for me swinging that weight of 21.6 calories per minute, which is impossible, really, if you think about it. But that's what the stuff said. And at that period of time, I was on Swing Quest, and I was doing. I would pick up a 24 kilo, and I would swing it for anywhere from 500 to 750 reps without putting it down, 4 or 5 days a week. And then every couple of weeks, I would say, okay, I'm going to see if I can go for 30 minutes without putting it down, or I'm going to see if I can go for 40 minutes without putting it down. And I got to where I could, and it became a sort of moving meditation for me. But it never got to be like really pleasurable, but it did start to suck a little less. So
well, then you're getting progress in.
Yeah. Well, there's fully distributed that no one thing is about to give out. The only thing that's left is the mind. My hands aren't going to rip up. My body is strong enough to keep going. My endurance and stamina is such that I can keep going. You get 35 minutes into that, and you're like, I just want to stop, but I said I wasn't going to stop. So you keep going. So from a mental aspect, that was critical for me too, as far as that overlap goes.
Yeah, I'm with that.
No one's
I think
ever
that's
asked me that question about what. Yeah, no one's ever asked me what thing I did do I think is most impressive, because just like anybody else, once I've done it, it's done, and I don't really think it's impressive so much anymore.
Yeah, no, totally less impressive. I mean, my man Roger here is double pressing 48 kilos eventually soon, so then he'll be like, "Yeah, big whoop." Everybody could probably do this.
Well, and that goes in line with the true definition of strength that I was told years ago is if you're really strong, it means you can do something that I can't do. Otherwise, you're not strong.
That's right. I guess you're as strong as you say you are. When it comes to that's right. When it comes to, this is a question I like to just kind of put out to everybody that comes on, just because inquiring minds always seem to want to know. When it comes to the snatch test, and you're talking about the big Secret Service one, but if we broke it down even into that 5-minute certification standard one, what kind of advice do you give people to prep for that, or to prepare or make it a reality for them when it comes to completing?
The first bit of advice is, if you're going to do that as part of a weekend certification, it is 5 minutes out of a 30-hour weekend. That's how important it is. And you have a chance to get if you bomb on it on the third day. I don't know what the scheduling and the curriculum's like anymore, but 5 years ago when I was still involved with it, I would tell people, if you bomb on it, you've got 3 months. Don't sweat it. Don't worry about it. You're here to learn. Right. So that's the first thing, is to just put your mind at ease on it. Don't let it be this monster under the bed that you're terrified of. As far as training for it, I am a huge, huge believer of the true definition of beast mode. And the true definition of beast mode is not give 110% and all that kind of stuff. Like, did you ever see any of the memes a few years ago where they took fitness quotes and put them in memes of people drinking alcohol? And it was like pictures of girls doing shots, and it would say stuff like, falling down is acceptable, passing out is acceptable, throwing up is acceptable, but quitting is not acceptable. And I'm like, put it in context, right?
Right.
Just because someone can do more than you doesn't mean that they'll always be able to, that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, okay. So around that same time, I was in San Diego doing an event, and I went to the zoo, and I'm like, okay, beast mode, right? Beast mode. There's lions here, universally accepted as the king of beasts. What does the king of beasts actually do? Not what does the gym mean king of beasts do? Because, you'd see the big Dorian Yates looking guy with the Photoshop dumbbell and like a lion's head on his body and all that. And that's cute art and everything, but that's not really what beast mode is. Let's look at beast mode in real life. We go out into the savannah. We find a pride of lions, and the lion sleeps 19 hours a day. He wakes up and he's hungry, and he's like, I'm going to go get something to eat. Now, someone actually pointed out to me later on, after I told the story 3 or 4 times in events, and they're like, no, he doesn't. He sends the women out to do it. And I'm like, I'm not going to touch that one, but you're making a good point. The king of beasts sends the queen out to get the groceries, right? Let's leave that part. We can say, what does she do, right? What does the queen do? They go out and they find the herd of the wildebeest, right? And if you know anything about wildebeest, you know that other than hippos, they kill more people in those areas of the world than any other animal, because they just don't care. They'll start running, and they'll run over anything that gets in their way. And they're particularly vicious, dangerous animals, right? So the lion goes out, he surveys the scene of all the wildebeest. Where is the biggest, baddest, sharpest horn, strongest BMF of a wildebeest? He's right over there. Okay, I'm going to go get this old one that's got a broken leg that's about to die anyway. That into training or into mental progression as well, not just physical training, but also mentally. What is the minimum effective amount of something that I can do right now that's going to move me toward my goal? That's the answer to beast mode. That's what the lion does. That's what people like my friend Adam Glass. If you've never seen Adam Glass, he's probably the strongest person pound for pound that's ever lived. And I don't say that lightly. Guy's 200 pounds, and he does pinch grip pull-ups like this on rafters, pull-ups, muscle-ups, back levers, that kind of stuff. And that's just one of the things that he does. And he turned me on to that idea of like, stop pushing yourself so hard. The adaptation, number one, happens in recovery. And number two, it doesn't have an off switch. So if you're pushing yourself to the limit all the time, then you're training yourself to go to the limit and fall apart. If you really want to get strong, if you don't get anything else from me on physical training, if you really want to get strong, here's the keys to the kingdom on that. Stop your set of whatever movement you're doing before you lose rep speed. you'll be able to do more total work and you won't get as tired, you won't be as sore, and you'll make faster progress than you ever have. If you're like a train to failure or train until your form starts to break down person, and you just adopt that, when does my press go from this to this? I went one rep too far. And if you're not quite sensitive to that yet, then stop it when you feel it start to slow down. Rest a little bit and go back and do some more. But the minimal effective amount is what we need in order to get the adaptations that we want. You know, if 2 Tylenol is good, why not take the whole bottle?
Yeah, party
because
time there.
Stupid, right?
Yeah. I like that. That's kind of interesting. And I will just attest, you know, I feel like I ultimately unknowingly took that approach near the end of prepping for that snatch test. And it really did just pay off in that matter. You know?
Absolutely. I mean, stop making things harder than they have to be and make everything as easy as possible, because your goal is not to destroy yourself. Your goal is to get stronger. Now, if your goal is to destroy yourself, that's fine. But that's a lot like saying, hey, I know I had a really great workout because I'm so sore. Well, if we're gauging everything on being sore, just let me hit you with a stick a few times and we can call it a day. You won't get any stronger, but you'll still be in pain, right?
Well, I passed my snatch test if you do that?
If I stand there and threaten to hit you with a stick at the moment of it, might happen.
But what about hitting me with it prior to?
Doubtful. Very doubtful.
All right. So we'll scratch that from your options, everybody listening. Okay. You know, that's not an option.
It's not an option. But the idea there being is we're inundated in the fitness world and in the personal development world as well, that all the magic happens outside of your comfort zone, and you have to break out, you know, exceed your own limits. Well, if you're going to exceed your own limits physically, the only possible outcome is that something breaks. I'll say that again. If you're going to exceed a physical limit, the only possible outcome is that something breaks. Now, if you did more than you thought you could do and you didn't break, that's not a physical limit. That's a mental limit. And that is much more malleable, and we're able to play with that much more. So stop trying to push yourself past your limit. And instead of that, stay in a comfort zone that is moving in the direction of your limit, but not slamming up against it. And eventually that comfort zone will expand and engulf your old limit, right? And that's paraphrasing an idea from Paul McElroy, who is one of the genius programmers in the world as well. I always like to give credit when I'm thinking about it in the middle of this, so that I don't come off like I came up with all this stuff, because I didn't. But the idea that if you want to snatch a 24 kilo, or if you want to do the snatch test, whatever weight is required for you in that, and the requirement for that test is 100 reps in 5 minutes, and you are currently able to do 50 reps in 5 minutes, there is zero benefit to be had from continually trying to get 100 reps in 5 minutes. But if you can do 52 reps next session and 55 the session after that, and you just let time work for you, eventually you'll get to the point where 70 reps is now the same level of effort that 50 reps used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually you'll get to where 100 reps is the same level of perceived effort as 70 used to be. When I put it in that context, that expansion of the comfort zone, what are you comfortable doing anytime? Like, I still to this day believe I could roll out of bed without my coffee in the morning and go past the snatch test, no matter what. That's just it. It's like 48 kilos isn't heavy. 100 snatches in 5 minutes of 24 kilos is not life-threatening. Now, I may suffer for it because I haven't done snatches for a while. I mean, I went through a period of time that I didn't do snatches for months and months and months, but I still am convinced I could have done that, just because I made the decision that that's like at the base level of what I want to do. So if you really want to get stronger, if you really want to get better at that kind of stuff, raise the base level, the part that's at the bottom where the foundational part is, and the peak automatically goes. Stop chasing the peak and work on making the base stronger.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then another point in there that I thought was really helpful is the fact that it takes time, and, you know, allow yourself that time when you're preparing for whatever it is to build that base and continue to build that base. Because, Dave, you're absolutely right. It eventually, the base will become the top, and then keep going beyond that. I love it.
One of the best ways to illustrate that is feat of strength that I do where I take a deck of cards and rip it in half. When I first started learning how to do this feat, I could not rip a full deck of cards. Now, as everybody knows, and I talk about this at howtoripadackofcards.com if you really want to learn how to do this feat. There's 52 cards in a deck, and then like a couple of jokers and a couple of instruction cards. So I think I'm actually sitting on 56 cards right now, but for easy math, let's use 52. When I first attempted to do this, the cards laughed at me, made fun of me, and said bad things about my mom. And what I realized that if I took half the deck, which is this much, can I rip this in half? And I was able to do it fairly comfortably. I was able to rip a half a deck in half without much issue. So I started training with that. And after a week, and I did maybe 3 or 4 sessions ripping 2 or 3 half decks in half at the time. The following week, I added 1 card. Imperceptible amount of increase in resistance, but still measurable. Quick math will tell you that if you do that, if you start with 26 cards, which is half a deck, and you add 1 card per week, in 6 months, you've got a full deck of cards and you just blast right through it with no trouble at all. None. And if you keep doing that long enough, you can even quarter them without any trouble at all. And that's progression. That's how progression should be. At no point did I like rip the skin off on my hands or like try to, push past my limit. None of that stuff. No, I just added a card a week. And it actually was a little bit faster than that for me. It took me about 3 months to get to a full deck because I had that beginner's learning curve on the technique. And then a vital part of that particular feat is the conditioning of this skin right here. That's where you'll get injured, is you'll rip a big blister off of that. And so I never lost skin on my hands because I knew that if I did that, that would be a week, 10 days of healing that I wasn't going to be able to train. So I used to tell people when I was in the kettlebell stuff, stop posting pictures of how awesome you think it is that your hands are bloody and your calluses are all ripped up. That means either your technique sucks, you did too much, or it's too humid.
Yeah.
That's the only reason you rip your hands.
That's
it's a
true.
sign of ignorance.
Yeah, I can agree with you on that. Well, I wasn't going to ask you to rip a deck of cards because I didn't want to ruin your last set, but I think that was totally bitching. And thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Where can people find you and get some more stuff about you or take some of your courses that you got to offer?
I say any and all. I'm not on some of the newer ones. I'm not on like Snapchat or TikTok,
OnlyFans.
Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Huh?
Are you on OnlyFans?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll check back.
Not yet, but if I can figure out a way to get paid to do that.
Topless card ripping. I mean, I'm just saying, if you make a mint off that, kick down.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, but a few months ago, there was something that I read on the internet. So, it's true. I read it on the internet that OnlyFans was going to do away with sexual content and just make it be more like a Patreon thing, I think. I don't know because I have other stuff to do. But beyond OnlyFans, which I'm not on, either as a performer or as a consumer, I've never actually been on there.
Clarity.
Iron Tamer, anywhere on any of those social media outlets. As far as websites go, if you want to know about feats of strength, oldtimestrongmanuniversity.com. I've got some free resources there. The card ripping course is howtoripadackofcards.com. The book is available for free. You just pay shipping at superhumanubook.com. And the main, if you want to talk to me about booking me for speaking and performing, irontamer.com. And then the main thing where the online coaching stuff happens is at superhumanucoaching.com. There's a presentation on there. It's about 40 or 45 minutes long where I kind of walk you through my history and how the mindset and the confidence stuff that I lacked as a kid wound up taking me from being this chubby kid who had this horrible stutter to being a professional speaker and a professional strongman and teaching in front of groups of big groups of people and all that kind of stuff. So taking that whole thing that I had around being able to talk and the stutter and all of that and actually resolving it and turning it into something that I do for a living now. So that's probably the best one for people to go to if they want to know more about what I'm really about is superhumanucoaching.com.
Yeah, I checked that out.
All that stuff too.
Yeah, I checked that out. I watched that the other night. It's good stuff. Well, Dave, thank you so much for joining us for this. There is definitely some valuable information here, and I appreciate you sharing that with us and with anybody that listens. Roger, you got anything else?
Oh, actually, you can do this in. We can add this in after the fact, but I think you froze a bit when you put up when you were talking about your bench press. What was that weight?
80 kilos.
Okay. Well, we can add that in after the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which another thing, another place that you can get information. I did a companion video to the book Taming the Bench Press a few years ago and sold it as a download, but then ultimately decided to just make it available for free. So tamingthebenchpress.com has a 75-ish minute long video that details all the progressions to go from nothing to bench press to two hands anyhow. It covers all the implements, barbell, dumbbell, kettlebell, all of that stuff on there. So, and that's another free resource.
Awesome.
That's great. I'll check that out. I watched your get up video and I can get up with the best of them. Don't you worry. Every day. All right. Anyways, thank you so much, Dave. Iron Tamer Dave Whitley, the man, the myth, the legend, tears a deck of cards off the rip. No pun intended. Roger, thanks again for everything. And we'll talk to you guys next time.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.